What is the best rule set for Jiu Jitsu? I'm gonna break it down for you right now. So look, I'm gonna bust this into 4 categories of promotions of rule set. First of all, we've got the ADCC rule set, and that's gonna represent really anything that has points involved. So IBJJF, NAGA, whatever. But we're talking about pro promotions, and we're talking about the ones that are at the top of the food chain. ADCC is gonna represent the points rule sets. EBI is gonna represent EBI. There's really nothing else that does exactly what EBI does. It's sub only, but it also has an overtime, no referee. CJJ makes the list because it is so prominently shown on Fight Pass, and it's its own thing. Even though it uses EBI rules, you're allowed to strike during the match. And then finally, we're gonna use who's number 1 to represent the no points, sub only, and it can go to a ref's decision type of competition. So for instance, I'm gonna throw 1 and fight to win into that category, but who's number 1 is the most prominent of all of those, so it's gonna represent those style of competitions. I've broken this down into 8 factors, and we're gonna go through them starting right now. The first factor is the "oh, I get it" factor. This is, how does this rule set look to the casual? All right, let's go with ADCC first. ADCC can be pretty exciting for the casual. Because there's points, it can stay active right up until the buzzer. You can get buzzer beaters, but it's not always easy to understand why people are scoring in ADCC. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm gonna give ADCC on the "oh, I get it" factor. ADCC is gonna get a 7. EBI, no confusing points to keep up with. The only way to win or lose is to tap. You don't really have to know much about top and bottom position. I think EBI does a pretty good job of being easy to understand. Because it goes to overtime, that makes the finality of it easy to understand. There's always a winner and a loser, and you understand why that happened. I'm gonna give EBI, let's give it an 8 on the "oh, I get it" factor. CJJ, I think even easier to understand for the casual than the EBI or ADCC rule sets, simply because when one guy's hitting the other one, it's easy to understand in that moment who's winning, who's doing something good, and who's having something bad done to them. I'm gonna give CJJ the most easy to understand score in this particular case. I'm gonna give it a 9. Who's number 1 for any of these rule sets that go to the judges potentially? Not always that easy to understand why the judges are scoring it the way they are if you don't know what you're looking at. Now, we're jiu-jitsu nerds, we kind of get it, and still sometimes we disagree with the decision because we don't understand what the judges were looking at. So for these type of rule sets, I'm gonna give them the lowest score on the "oh, I get it" factor, and that's gonna get a 5. 5. The next category, fun to compete. So the competitions that are the most fun for the competitors. For ADCC rules, I think this is probably the most fun to compete in for the competitors because you can fight for every little position. It's a super open rule set. Most everything is legal. You know, it's super aggressive. It's a lot of fun to get out there and scrap it up under that rule set. I'm gonna give it an 8. EBI, fun to compete at? Definitely. But some competitors don't like doing it because of the overtime, and they feel like people can sort of stall and get a position that they wouldn't have normally given up during the match. But some people really do like that EBI rule set because it doesn't have the points, and they don't like to even focus on that. They just want to go sub only. So I'm gonna give fun to compete in EBI, I'm gonna give that an 8 as well. So both fun to compete at, ADCC and EBI, even though they're fun to compete at for actually the opposite reason. Both fun. CJJ, fun to compete at. Nope, you're gonna get hit in the face. That's much closer to a fight than a jiu-jitsu competition, and you can definitely see that way less people are interested in competing under that rule set. So CJJ, fun to compete at for the average guy? No. 4, not fun to compete at. Do not want to get hit in the face myself, and I'm guessing most of you guys don't want to get cracked either. Who's number 1? Fun to compete at in a sub only, might go to the judges rules format. Pretty fun, but it can leave you with a sour taste in your mouth if you feel like you won a pretty obvious decision and it went the other way. You're kind of left going, I don't understand why it went down like that. So fun, yes, not as fun as the others, but more fun than getting hit in the face. I'm gonna give it a 6. All right, the next category is, do the BJJ nerds like it? Do jiu-jitsu nerds like this rule set? Is it fun for them to watch? Jiu-jitsu nerds love ADCC, and I can't blame them. It's super fun to watch. I'm a jiu-jitsu nerd, and I love the ADCC rule set. Me personally, I don't mind points. I think points force you to show different parts of your game. ADCC a lot of times comes down to the buzzer. The most high-level guys are there. That's exciting to me. Fun for jiu-jitsu nerds. I think this one's an easy 10. ADCC is number 1 most fun for jiu-jitsu nerds. EBI, fun to watch. I like EBI. I like that it doesn't go to a decision. It doesn't come to points. It's a totally different rule set, but it's super, super fun to watch. I like EBI. However, a lot of jiu-jitsu nerds do not like EBI. So even though I like it, I gotta downgrade it just because some people, it's not their favorite rule set. So I gotta try to take my own bias out of it a little bit, because I am clearly biased towards it. And I'm gonna score a 7 for EBI. CJJ, fun for jiu-jitsu nerds to watch. I think it's the most exciting rule set, and I would consider myself absolutely a jiu-jitsu nerd. It's exciting because striking, dude, it changes everything. However, the jiu-jitsu community likes this rule set the least out of all of them. Why? I don't quite understand, but that is what's going on. So how do the jiu-jitsu nerds feel about it? I gotta score CJJ as a 4. A lot of people don't like CJJ. I think that that's completely insane. I scored a 4. Even though it's the most fun to watch if you're a casual, it's the least enjoyed by the overall jiu-jitsu community. Who's number 1? Right on the other side of it. I hear people complaining about the who's number 1 cards all the time. They didn't like it because it went to this decision, that decision was wrong, or this guy clearly had the better of him and they scored it for the other guy. So I hear people griping about that one too. Gotta score that one down here with CJJ in the 4 and 5 range. All right, most exciting. This is kind of the, oh wow, this is the wow factor. Like, how many times in the match does something pop off that makes you jump up out of your seat? That definitely can happen a lot with the ADCC rule set. The ADCC rules, because there's points and because it can come down to the wire, you can have buzzer beaters, and that's a huge factor for delivering those oh wow moments. I gotta score ADCC pretty high on the exciting factor, plus the most high level people are at ADCC. ADCC, as far as excitement goes, is absolutely a 10. EBI. I think EBI is pretty exciting too. If you like jiu-jitsu that's determined by submissions, EBI is a really exciting rule set. And one of the things that makes EBI so exciting, and I see this when I'm there for every card. I'm sitting right beside the mat for every match at EBI and at CJJ. And I'm telling you, the overtimes get the crowd cracking harder than anything else. People love the overtimes because there's a tension that builds to it. Now, if you're watching on TV, I don't know exactly how you feel about that. If you're a competitor, I get it, some of you guys don't like that rule set, but I'm telling you, when you're sitting there mat side, what gets the crowd popping the most? It's almost always the overtimes. EBI is exciting, but it can turn into a little bit of a stally thing during regulation because some guys are trying to game the rules just to get to overtime so they can have that position. So I do understand some of that criticism. So we're going to score EBI as an 8 on the exciting scale. CJJ, we're adding strikes in. That definitely makes things more exciting. And there's a giant difference in the reaction of the crowd, the energy in the crowd, the tension in the audience for a CJJ match versus a regular EBI match. When they were doing the Medusa cards and they were splitting them, there was an 8-woman bracket that was just EBI rules, and then there was an 8-woman bracket that was CJJ rules, and they were running them beside each other. And to me, that moment, when they started doing that, it was so clear what the audience prefers. It was so clear. So CJJ for me is a 10 in excitement. It's got the striking and it's got the finality of having an overtime and that built-in tension to the game. CJJ gets a 10 on the exciting scale. Who's number 1? It can be exciting. When there's a great sub, that's exciting. There's not as much tension that develops over the course of a who's number 1 match though. A lot of times at the end you can kind of be left going, I don't know, that was a kind of a boring match. You know, so I think that happens more in those rule sets than in any other. You know, I'm using who's number 1 as the name of this category, but this really applies to obviously any rule set that uses referees to come up with the decision. I'm gonna give who's number 1 a 6 on the exciting scale. Which rule set determines who's the best? Well, that's a great question. Let's go in reverse order for this one. We'll start with who's number 1. Who's number 1, you can definitely start to figure out who's best over there pretty well because they have so many high-level guys. You got Gordon Ryan competing over there. You got Craig Jones, you got Mourinho, Marigali, tons of talent and the best guys over at who's number 1. So winning a match over there really carries a lot of weight in the community. So I'm going to give who's number 1 an 8 on helping us to determine who's actually the best. CJJ. You can make an argument that CJJ actually is the best one to determine who's best at Jiu Jitsu because it does involve strikes, and Jiu Jitsu was meant to have strikes in it. But the level of competitor at CJJ is generally lower because less guys are willing to get in there and compete when striking is involved. So I'm going to score CJJ as a 6 right there. EBI, usually a higher talent level, and they have to go through a tournament. That's awesome. You don't really do that necessarily with who's number 1. But again, it's not always the best dudes in the bracket. It's usually pretty top heavy, and then you got some kind of up and coming guys filling out the last, fourth of the bracket, third of the bracket. So I'm going to score it higher than CJJ, but lower than who's number 1. I'm going to give it a 7. And then to determine who's the actual best, we'll go with ADCC last because that's super obvious that is widely recognized as the World Championships, the Olympics of Jiu Jitsu. All the best guys are there. You have to show a much wider variety of skills to win or even to score at ADCC. You have to be a competent grappler on your feet. You have to be able to control. You have to be able to submit. And you have to be able to take 2 points from a man that doesn't want to give up 2 points. The best in the world are all doing it at ADCC. ADCC continues to be the best way to determine who's the best competitor. ADCC gets a 10. The next category is finality. In other words, which rule set has the least subjectivity to it? And we'll start over here with who's number 1 because it has the most subjectivity of all of them because it literally can go to a referee's decision. If that's going to a referee's decision, there's a lot of subjectivity to that. There's always some dispute over who actually won that. So For finality, I'm actually going to score who's number one pretty low on this. We're going to score it as a 4. Even though it can be pretty final with a submission, and it can look pretty easy to determine who the winner is, it doesn't always play out like that. CJJ never goes to a ref's decision, never has to go to points. The athletes always decide who wins that match. Now, you might not like the rules of that game, you might not like the rules of that match for whatever reason, but you can never say that that was a bad referee decision. So for finality, combat jiu-jitsu, and EBI both get a 10. The competitors always determine who wins the match, not the referee and not the judges. CJJ, 10. EBI, 10. ADCC, slightly below EBI and CJJ on finality, because you can have poor judges' decisions in ADCC, and we've seen that happen a couple of times. We're like, oh, how did he get that? Isaac versus Wagner at the last ADCC. A lot of people thought that Isaac won that, but they advanced Wagner. And I think about that happened to AJ Agazarm. A lot of people thought he should have won his match because he didn't get his 2. And there's referees deciding who gets the points and who doesn't get the points, and sometimes that can kind of get hairy. And so for finality, it gets a 7. Which of these generally has the highest level competitors? ADCC is an obvious number 1. It has the absolute highest level of competitors. ADCC gets a 10 out of 10. The best of the best play at ADCC. The best of the best compete and take gold at ADCC, and those guys are absolutely always crowned as the king of their weight class until the next ADCC when somebody else tries to take it from them. EBI, a lot of really good guys at EBI, a lot. And over the years, we've seen more and more really good guys pouring into EBI. But again, sometimes the bracket can get filled up with, like we had to put this guy in here at the last second. We need some guys to help fill out the bracket. So a lot of times the EBI cards, the brackets will be kind of top heavy. So I'm going to score EBI as an 8 right here. And then I'm going to score CJJ even lower than that, because again, there's just not as many athletes to pull from, because a lot of athletes don't want to do CJJ because they don't want to deal with, they don't want to do the striking for whatever their reason is. So CJJ is going to get a 7. And who's number 1? I'm going to score it right on an even level with EBI. Who's number 1 has a lot of up-and-comers that come through the card as well, but it does have like peak guys up there as well, because you got Gordon over there, and anytime Gordon is on your promotion, it's pushing your level way up. You got Miragali over there. A lot of guys competing on who's number 1 that are at the top of their field. So I'm going to score who's number 1 as a 9. Just, I wish I could give it like an 8.8, or I guess I can, it's my thing, but I'm just going to score it a 9 because I can't add decimals. I'm from Lawrence County, Alabama. All right, final category, most dunks. Where are we going to see the most people getting submitted? Which one is it going to be? And I don't have the stats in front of me, so I'm going purely by how does it feel when I watch every one of these cards from start to finish. I feel like the most submissions happen in EBI. It seems like an easy call for me. EBI, CJJ definitely get the most submissions. So I'm going to score both of these as a 10. The most submissions that you can get happen on those cards. They're happening in the brackets because, like I said, some of these brackets are kind of top heavy. So you're getting the number 1 seed dunking on the 16 seed. Like, look at what Andrew Tackett just did. He goes through bang, 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 all subs at CJJ. That was sick. I'm going with ADCC behind that. I'm going to give ADCC an 8 on the most dunks. And then I'm going to give who's number 1 and other. Ooh, that was an ugly 8. Let's redo that. I'm going to give ADCC an 8, and I'm going to give who's number 1 a 7. Okay, let's find out finally which rule set is the best, according to me. Drum roll, please. ADCC scores the highest with 70. Who's number 1? scores the lowest with 50. I sort of feel like that's unfair, even though it's my criteria. This is not a scientific process, okay? EBI comes in second with 66, and CJJ comes in third with 60, even though CJJ is my personal favorite rule set to watch. You know, I don't know if I even agree with my own system here. I just made it up right before this video started. How would you score this? Is this what you would have come up with? Let me know in the comments.